Putin will not win this. And the question is, do some of the allies want to be on the winning side, or do they want to be remembered as those who sat on the sideline?
Good afternoon.
Before I come to that breaking news out of Ramstein, just tell me what the situation on the ground in Ukraine is. What's the latest state of play with this war that now has nearly been going on for a year?
Yeah, so there hasn't been much movement on the front line since that quite dramatic withdrawal from the city of Kherson by the Russians in November. They've put all their weight, thousands of troops, into capturing a rather sort of insignificant town in the east called Bakhmut in the past couple of months. It's insignificant in itself. It does sit on a road that would lead them to the rest of Donetsk province, which is one of these two provinces known as the Donbass, which is the main aim, has been the main aim of Russia since 2014, to get hold of these two provinces that they've sort of officially annexed in their own view. So, but they've really used human wave tactics on this town of Bakhmut and the smaller town of Soledar just to the north. They've been using this Wagner group with its mercenaries, a lot of them released convicts who've been sort of recruited to fight for them, and they've taken very heavy casualties. They've made some small gains. They've taken most of Soledar, and this morning they took a village just to the south of Bakhmut. So there's a bit of a pincer movement going on there, but it's not by any means a fast or dramatic advance.
I'm fascinated you mentioned the Wagner group there. The MOD in the UK says that they might command up to 50,000 fighters now in Ukraine, which is an astonishing figure, really. But I mean, just to sum up what you've said before we talk about this meeting that's just broken up in Ramstein, there's no real sort of decisive move that either Russia or Ukraine are making in recent weeks. So is this a sort of war of attrition, is it, at the moment?
It is, but you have to remember it's deep winter here. It's very cold, and there'll be muddy. When I say it's very cold, the last couple of days it's above freezing for the first time for a couple of weeks. So the winter snow is thawing. It's very muddy out there. The assumption is that both sides will be planning spring offensives when the ground hardens a bit, and that's very much what Ukraine wants these tanks for. They want something to help them to make the sort of swift and dramatic gains that they made in two particular moments last year. The defense of Kharkiv, where they suddenly managed to roll up a whole bunch of Russian brigades in the northeast of the country in September, and then that very calculated strike on Kherson city in November. So that's the Ukraine plan, and they want a spear point, if you like, to head that up. Russia is recruiting more and more soldiers. It's done a mass mobilization in the last quarter of last year of allegedly 300,000 men, and as you say, it's got the Wagner force. Of those 50,000, it's said that 40,000 come from prisons, have been recruited direct from the prison system. So right. The Russians relying on numbers, the Ukrainians hoping for these tanks.
Right, well, that tees up my next guest, Richard Spencer from the Times. Thank you very much. Actually, I believe our next guest is just... Stay with us, Richard, because I want to get your thoughts on that press conference that's just underway at the moment in Ramstein. Clearly a disappointment to Ukraine that there's not an immediate commitment for those Leopard 2 tanks from Germany. And, you were just putting that in perspective there with the situation on the ground. How much of a disappointment will this be, in your view, that Germany hasn't committed immediately?
A huge disappointment. I actually spent the last couple of days with tank brigades in Bakhmut on and around the front line. They were showing. I mean, the one guy in particular was showing me how crap, to put it bluntly, he thought his kit was. It had broken down. In fact, in Bakhmut, sort of not far short of the front line, which is not what you want. It's a sort of Soviet era tank that had seen service in Afghanistan. They're very keen on modern tanks. There's a lot of anger with Germany anyway in Ukraine, which Ukrainians feel is stalling on the provision of weapons that Ukraine's own neighbours want to give, particularly Poland, who want to give a lot of these Leopard tanks to Ukraine, but they require permission from Germany, which, as the manufacturer of the original endpoint, The British offer of 14 challengers is they're all very pleased with that. Obviously, it's quite interesting to be in a country where Britain is so highly regarded as Ukraine, thanks to its taking the lead on issues like this.
Right.
But
well,
14
Richard,
tanks isn't going to make a huge difference.
Indeed. Well, Richard, expert analysis as ever. Thank you very much for joining us from Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine. Let's put some of that to Radek Sikorski, who's Poland's former foreign minister, joins me on the line now. Good afternoon, Mr. Sikorski.
Hello, good afternoon.
I'm sure you've been following this press conference and the meeting at Ramstein Air Base in Germany closely. What is your view on the decision by Germany not to immediately give the green light to these Leopard 2 heavy tanks going to Ukraine?
A huge disappointment. And really, when the German government says that they will only now look at the feasibility of doing it, that's, I have to say, completely unserious. This is shredding Germany's credibility in Central Europe.
Wow, I mean, that's really quite something, shredding their credibility. Do you think this would have happened under Angela Merkel? Do you blame the current Chancellor for this impasse?
No, I'm afraid the CDU are now, of course, criticizing SPD, but Merkel took decisions on Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2, if you remember, already after the Anschluss of the Crimea. And that all disregarded the security arguments of Central and Eastern Europe. So I'm afraid there is a pattern here.
So Germany has just cozied up to Russia too much in recent years?
It's, of course, history, but it's also greed, doing good business. It's misreading their own history, Ostpolitik and so on. It's forgetting that when they were a frontline state, they had 300,000 American, British, and Canadian troops defending them. And it's, I think, a deep-seated feeling that Russia would not threaten Germany, which is odd, given that Russia has deployed Iskander missiles in the Kaliningrad Oblast, which now have the range to nuke Berlin.
So,
very strange.
Well, what is the impact then of this decision that you're so disappointed in? I mean, what is the impact for Ukraine, but also for world security, in your view?
Well, Germany is a very important country. It accounts for a quarter of the economy of the European Union. Germany has completely disarmed itself. I mean, Poland has the same number of German tanks as Germany. We had our reset with Russia, but at the same time, we've been spending 2% of our GDP on defense for 2 decades, whereas Germany has been consuming its peace dividend. And Chancellor Scholz makes a good speech at the beginning of this war, but I understand not a single euro of the 100 billion promised on rearmament has actually been spent. I repeat, this is unserious.
Well, other European countries and indeed the UK as well, no longer in the EU of course, have made significant pledges. But is that not enough? Do we need Germany's Leopard 2 tanks to make a decisive difference in this war?
Yes, we do, because if Germany wants to go back to buying Russian raw materials, which is a legitimate desire, the best way to achieve it is for Ukraine to win, for Russia to lose, for Putin to be unseated, and for Russia to have a more civilized government. Because Ukraine is not going to go down. The U.S. has made a strong commitment. Other countries have made a strong commitment. Putin will not win this. And the question is, do some of the allies want to be on the winning side, or do they want to be remembered as those who sat on the sideline?
Do you think America could do more? Is it legitimate to expect them to do that in the interest of world peace?
They are doing a lot. $45 billion, which is what's allocated for this year, is a solid chunk of money. Remember, the European Union is also doing a lot. We just sent a wire transfers for $3 billion last week to help to keep the Ukrainian state taking over. If you add up what the EU institutions and EU member states do together, because we are a confederation, unlike the United States, those are comparable figures. If you'd asked me a year ago how much the West would do, I wouldn't imagine that we would do as much. So we're doing fine, but we all need to pull together. And Germany has a particular historical responsibility to prevent tyranny from winning in Eastern Europe.
Radek Sikorski, Poland's former foreign minister, thank you very much for joining us with that analysis on the breaking news out of Ramstein that Germany will not be supplying immediately its Leopard 2 tanks as Ukraine had hoped.